Hello, word nerds! We are live. It is Sunday, February the 20th, 2022, and we're going to be doing a first line workshop tonight. And so it's part workshop, part shenanigan game night type of vibe. Tonight, we're going to be talking about first lines and beginnings generally, and we are going to have some exercises in which, like, I show a stock photo and you try and come up with a first line for what you think the story is here. And we'll share the first lines we come up with, have a good time. We'll have our last exercise of the night will be themed towards your own work in progress, so it won't all just be like non-work in progress ones. And, you know, we can't make you do the prompts. You can work on your writing during that time if that's what you'd rather do. And so I've got some notes. I have like slides for the exercises, but not really slides for like all the talking points this time. So I can share the link to the slides if people want it. Just let me know in the discussion section. It's just pictures. And all the pictures today I got from unsplash.com, fabulous stock photo website. So yeah. I'm going to be sharing some of my favorite first lines in between each thing as well. So we're going to kick it off with the opening line from A Marvelous Light by Freya Marsk, which is, Reginald Gatling's doom found him beneath an oak tree on the last Sunday of a fast-fading summer.
Ooh.
Great first line. I'm like halfway through this book. It's really fun. So historically, on our channel / most of the people who were talking about writing on the internet over the last like 10 years, we talk about opening lines like they were kind of this like big deal, make or break thing. And I have some opinions on this, but I wanted to ask you all first, how make or break is an opening line for you? How important is it to you personally when you are reading a story?
Reading.
Oh, reading.
I say barely at all.
Yeah.
Notice if it's a really cool first line, but if it's not, I'm not gonna be like, oh, I'm putting this book down. The first line wasn't perfect.
It definitely has to pull me into the paragraph. Like I do have a thing where I pick up a book in the bookstore and read the first line. And if I think it's super boring.
So say, like, if it's a book you bought already, you're not going to be like, oh, I did not like this.
No, definitely not. If it's one I'm looking forward to and the first line is boring, I'm not going to be like, next. But yeah, if it's like a book I'm not sure about, or I'm just kind of like exploring what it's about, then I'll look at the first line or sometimes even the first paragraph. And it's just I think
like, it takes like the first image of like,
yeah, exactly.
Kind of thing.
It's more like the case of like, if the first line is really good, I'm like, oh my God, I'm in, right?
Yeah, that's what Anne Griswold is saying as well. I take notice when the first line is above par, but I don't think I really notice.
It's not make or break, you know?
Yeah, especially
I would notice if it was like really bad, you know? But I don't come across that very often.
I'm curious how long does it take you to realize that a book is one that you're definitely all in, rest of the ride, you want to read this whole book, versus I haven't sunk in enough time that I feel like obligated to finish this and I'm not feeling it.
I'm never going to be able to think of it, but there was definitely something recently where in the first little bit I knew this was going to be like, oh, I am all about this. This is amazing. There's no way I'm going to remember.
I think for me, it's like, it can be the first page, and it's usually not so much like the specific content as the voice. Like if it's a really voicey, maybe sometimes kind of funny or tongue-in-cheek or sarcastic voice, then I'll be like, yeah, I don't really care what the story's about. I'm in to like just read and be in this character's head.
I'd say like typically the first chapter, I'll know whether I'm like in or not. The latest I'll quit a book sometimes is maybe about 25%. Like if I'm 25% and I'm still just kind of like feeling meh about it, I'll like sometimes drop a book. But usually the first chapter, I know whether I'm going to enjoy it or not.
I used to be one of those readers who would just read to finish the book. And then I, a few years ago, was like, you know what? We'll just use like the agent 50-page rule. Like if I'm not in by 50 pages, I can set it aside and not feel guilty. Because I was always having that thought of like, what if it gets really good later on in the book?
They worked really hard on it.
I go more like sunk cost fallacy of like I've already read part of this at my Goodreads goal, but like once Rachel just declared that if you read 50%, you can count it on Goodreads. That's my rule now.
I think if I've
Yeah,
read
I've noticed-
more than half, I'll count it sometimes. Like if I've made it more than halfway through the book.
See, if I've
but I
made
feel
it
like it's gonna take
halfway,
me too long.
if I've made it halfway through, I'm like, I gotta just finish this, or it will bug me if it's on my shelf half finished.
Yeah.
It depends
helps
on the
with
book.
reading
It
different
depends on. Yeah, for me, it depends on how long I think it will take me to finish it. Like if I'm like halfway through it and I'm not loving it, and it's like a light romance book, I'm probably gonna just finish it anyway because I can finish it in like a day. But if it's like a dense fantasy book and I'm halfway
Has
through
anyone
it,
here finished Priory?
no.
I read 250 pages and I was like, I can see how this is good, but I've read one book's worth and I'm done.
I
Right?
haven't
I'm like,
started it yet.
if I'm like halfway through a book and I'm not vibing with it, and I know that I could read like 3 more books at the time it's going to take me to finish it, then I'm just going to quit because once again, like I could be making progress on my Goodreads goals, so kind of the opposite of what Kelly was saying. You know, this is like holding me back from finishing books.
And it's like that book is obviously super good. Like it just, wrong place, wrong time. It's not gonna hurt the author if I DNF it.
And audiobooks has been a game changer. This isn't the topic, we should switch, but like being able to just listen faster does help.
Yeah, I was thinking a lot about, I think I'm a lot more strict about beginnings when I'm using platforms that allow me to consume a lot of books at once. Because I have a Scribd membership and I got a Kindle for Christmas, which came with like a Kindle Unlimited free trial. And with stuff like that, if it's a book that wasn't already on my list, I'll like look at it. And if the first paragraph isn't vibing, then it's a huge platform. There's tons of books. I can find something else. I don't have to like wait and see if I'm gonna like this one. Kayla said audiobooks at 2 times speed is the key to a clean kitchen. So true. My house is never cleaner than when I'm listening to lots of audiobooks.
Ben Griswold's shock at the Goodreads revelation though.
I just figure, Rachel just really seems like she knows what she's doing. She's the most famous book internet person I know, and she's also worked in publishing. If she says it's fine.
Permission granted.
Yeah.
I don't think if I was using it all the time, I wouldn't let myself do it, but it's just like some exceptions of like nonfiction ones where I want to just jump around or whatever, but I put in the work. I deserve the credit.
Yeah. So kind of we've talked about now how much it matters to us as readers. I feel like the answer's different when you're thinking about it as a writer / as someone who's trying to get something you have written published. Just thinking a lot about how particularly, I can't speak to the indie publishing experience, but trying to get traditionally published, the agents will typically only see your first 10 pages, and so making sure that every sentence is super good.
I think you already did
so
kind
important.
of speak to the indie publishing side, saying like Kindle Unlimited, which is where a lot of indies live. If the first paragraph doesn't sell you your 10 pages.
Mm-hmm. I'm checking my notes here.
But yeah, I definitely think there
yeah.
is like a lot of pressure when you're writing to be like, I have to have the perfect first sentence. But like for most of us, other than Erin, like it's actually not that important as a reader, like for it to be perfect.
I was gonna say like I want to impress you guys, like my beta readers. So like that's the only like direct reader feedback I'm ever gonna get. I want one of you to tell me it's great.
And like I think I always find it important to like have a good first line that like pulls people in, and to like I think it's more important to figure out like where you're starting the story, that you're like starting it in the right place. But having like I think there's been like a lot of focus in the past on like Twitter and stuff, and like having like just like the perfect, most captivating first sentence, and it's like, is that really that important? Like,
I figure if you can make me care about what's happening to the character, that's what's important in the first chapter from a reader's
For
standpoint.
sure, yeah.
Yeah, I think the first chapter matters way more than the first sentence.
Yeah, or the first page a lot of the time. Well, particularly I know there was a lot of pressure while I was querying, and even sometimes still now, if you're sending a story to an editor or something, of like the first page being like that first impression, the first thing that hooks them in. So like to me, it feels like a lot more pressure on, yes, of course, the first sentence, but also how the first sentence leads them into the rest of the page, and hopefully, you know, gets them hooked, right? So
Yeah.
it is some pressure, definitely.
And it is an extra tool in your belt, or an extra like chance of getting lucky if you do have a great first line. She says, as we're going to lead into a whole chat about first lines and why they're important. So
well, thinking about this was why my initial pitch for this workshop was like a first line workshop, and then I was thinking about it and I was like, oh, well, you know, like how important is it really when you're a reader, which was why I decided to expand it a little. Like we're going to start with first lines and then build out to beginnings at large. So talking about first lines, I have one last question before we move into the first exercise, which is, do any of you have any opening line or opening paragraph pet peeves? Not necessarily like universally bad, but anything that you just personally don't like. Erin?
Okay, so I have so many pet peeves, but like my main one is from A, reading a lot on Wattpad, and then B, reading other people's first pages, is like a character running through the woods, usually at night. Usually you don't know what she's running from, but it's clear she's running for her life. And I hate it so much, with just like this visceral hot as the sun hatred, because like A, mostly because I'm sick of it, but also B, because like I don't care. I don't know who she is. I don't know what's chasing her. I don't know where she is. She's in the woods. Like we've thrown into an action like scene with no idea of what's going on, so it leaves me completely stranded. And again, I don't care. Whatever's chasing the character can kill her, and I wouldn't bat an eye, because it's hard to get any kind of like personality into that too, right? She's like in the mode of like freaked out and running for her life. So anyways, I have more that I have pet peeves, but that's a whole nother chat.
Yeah, I think in general, just like openings that just, it's really hard to write an opening that throws readers right into the action. And it was like very much like a 2010s thing in writing. Like you have to start with the action, and like I think it's like really disorienting
immediately.
Any opening that I as a reader am like, I don't know what's going on. I don't know who these people are. I think there's a time and place for like disorienting openings. It can like maybe work for some types of stories where like
you can
want
do
people
it
to feel that way. Not like horror or something. You like want it to feel disorienting, but a lot of times I think it's unintentionally that way, and that's
And usually when it bothers me is when it's like done in an amateur way. Like you can definitely throw somebody right into an action scene and still have that voicey hook, or still have you care about a character if you're doing it right. But like a lot of the time it feels like it's not done right.
All right, so we're going to be talking about like picking good opening points and stuff after the first exercise. Again, the exercises tonight are just fun, being creative without necessarily feeling like we're having to dig super deep. So we are going to have these stock photos that I have brought together, a series of them, and we're going to kind of ramp up. So we're going to start with an opening line for a few short exercises, and then we'll have one that's a little longer where you can try and write a beginning, and then at the end we'll have one geared towards your work in progress. So let me get my slides up. We're going to take 5 minutes just for fun. Oh, no, wait, Vanessa said I just did a first lines workshop last week. That's funny.
Cool.
Okay, so write a first line for this photo, and I'm going to start a timer for 5 minutes because I'm super organized today and don't want to be beholden to the clock on my computer. Oh, why is got like a 56-day stopwatch thing running?
I have 56 days to write this first line, is what you're telling me.
I'm gonna guess it was a toddler playing with your phone.
Probably. All right, so we're going to go for 5 minutes. Just try. You can write a few, see which one you like best. And yeah, good luck. And time. So we've already got some really good ones submitted. We've got Davis said, I told you we should have gone to Miami. Jennifer said they sat in the rain waiting for the fishing boat to return. And Misty Kate said, having missed the ferry, their only choice now is to return to the old lodge and get out of the rain. Start of all my favorite horror novels. So I'm gonna pull this photo. I'm gonna leave it up until everyone's done sharing theirs because I'm also gonna make all of you share. You don't have to all share every time, I guess, if you really don't want to. But
I went in a very different direction from people in the comments. Mine was, it rained nonstop in the 3 weeks leading up to the world's ending.
Ooh, I like it.
One. Mine was, Alex had a 3-page long list of violent things she wanted to do with Milo Green, but none of them included sitting on a frigid shore sharing an umbrella while the world ended.
Another world ending.
Anyone else got one they want to share?
Go ahead.
I did not do a world ending one, though that did occur to me. So we were all a little bit on the same page. I went with, for 6 days, I went back to for 6 days, I went back to wait at the spot Anastasia had gone under.
That's a very Aaron direction to take it.
I went kind of like a fantasy route. Traveling via umbrella only works in a thunderstorm.
Ooh, I love that.
I love
Mine was, Dale was still trying to be romantic, but my socks were wet and I wanted to go home.
I love all of these.
I want to read all of these stories, please.
Yes. We've got a few more. Joe Catherine said Sharon had only been human for 6 days and had determined Shetland was just as miserable when she was human as when she'd been a cat. Umbrellas were a bonus, though.
Ooh, I like that.
And we've got Andrew Walker said, this spot where the mountains meet the sea will always be ours, even when I'm gone.
Oh, a sad story.
And Griswold said, it's strange, no matter how close or far the storm seems, we're never prepared when it arrives. Vanessa said, 3 years ago, Amy's sister disappeared from this very spot at the end of the Kennedy Pier, the only sign of her presence, an abandoned umbrella.
Ooh.
I love all of these so much. I am already having a lot of fun. Thank you so much for all being here and participating.
I really like how each new line makes me think of like a different genre, even. Like the tone is so radically different, even though it's just one line.
Yes, and so that's actually what we're going to talk about next, which is the components of a killer opening line, which after researching a bunch of them, I think that there's maybe like 4 big components that a good opening line could have. Not necessarily that it should try to have all of those elements, but that it should have some combination of. And that is character, conflict, world, and tone. So, character, plot, world, and vibes. Arguably, I think they should all have some level of vibes or tone. Does anyone have anything else that they particularly try to think of when they're coming up with or editing their first lines?
I start with a scene, so I know either we're heading for an inciting incident or I start with kind of an inciting incident, and I usually try to pull like the most interesting thing from said scene and start with that, if that makes sense. So that's how I form my first sentence.
So I always have to have some form of conflict, even if it isn't like the central conflict of the book. And I would argue most of the time you probably don't want to like open with the central conflict, but I like the first line to like have a hint of some sort of conflict.
I think it, like, I always want my first line to have people asking questions. Like, I don't know whose it was in the comments. Sorry, I'll have to go through again, but somebody said like they sat there waiting for the fishing boat to come back for them. And I was like, that's a great example of a first line where you're not like shoving someone into action, but there's also so many questions. Who are they? Why are they waiting? The ship, why is it coming back for them now? Why was it here before?
Yeah, the promise that something's going to happen soon is great.
Yeah, exactly. So I thought that was actually a really good example of I'm asking questions. I want to read more.
When I think of it, I love first lines that like you can echo in your last line or like the closing scene.
Yes. Yeah. 100%.
So you mentioned briefly, Erin, just this idea of like trying to pick just the right spot to start it. I'm curious if anyone has any tips for balancing like jumping in where the action is versus, you know, giving you enough room to not be like, I don't care about all of this.
I want to like look through books that I'm familiar with and like, where did you start?
I have several lines. I have another one that I was going to share before we do our next exercise, but I can do it now. Eve Brown didn't keep a diary. She kept a journal. There was a difference, which is from Act Your Age, Eve Brown by Talia Hibbert.
See, I love that. I feel like that's an example of like a really voicey first line. Like, I'm like, this girl has opinions about things, and I want to know them. You know?
And you want to know what the difference is. Yeah.
Exactly.
I struggle with beginnings, so I don't really have a tip at all for that. I feel like I always start someplace and then start a different place in each subsequent draft. So it's like trying to find the right one.
I find myself like usually returning to the same technique, I guess. Like I really like a really interesting, usually an odd beginning, like something is going on, but also I want the moment to be quiet enough that I can delve into like a little bit of detail. So, you know, for example, the one I'm working on now, she finds a dead body in the woods, and like there's no immediate, yes, of course, you know, all the time. And it's like a description of the body. She recognizes who it is. And we go into a little bit of detail about what the scene is like, what the tone is like, but there's no like running through the woods because the murder is gone. Right. So it's something is happening, something awful has happened, but it's a quiet moment, which is, I realize looking back, usually how I start my books for some reason.
When I'm editing first, usually I don't try to stress too much about first lines when I'm in the first drafting stage anymore, because I used to feel like I couldn't start unless I had the perfect first line. But that just means that revisions me hates past me for not coming up with it. And one of my favorite exercises that I've done recently is that I'll pull out a piece of paper, like step away from the computer, just have a piece of paper, and then I'll write down like 10 possible first lines, like not exaggerating, 10 plus possible first lines, kind of jumping from spot to spot from where I thought I wanted to begin the story and see like what flows the best. And I've been really pleased with how that has worked out. Like it's kind of a pain, but then suddenly you hit one and you're like, wait a minute, that one is good. All these other ones were trash, but this one is a good one.
Yeah, I think no matter the genre, I was going to say like just in fantasy and sci-fi, but I actually think no matter the genre, like finding an opening that allows you to like, at the very least, like give readers a peek into like the world you're establishing or like the environment around your characters, even if it's like contemporary realism, like the environment your character's in, and how they like what their place is in that environment or that world, or that setting. Can be really helpful in an opening, because I know I don't like to read something where like I can't really tell like what type of place is this, where are they, you know, like I think like kind of helping like ground your readers in like a place at the beginning can be really helpful. So I try to think of like a point in the story, like an opening point that allows you to like understand where the character is.
That's a really good point. And also like I feel like it's important to like go easy on yourself and realize you can figure out where to start, and then you absolutely can go back and realize, okay, I need to start a little earlier. Like I do that all the time, where I realize I'm trying to explain too much, and I'm like, oh well, it's because I have to go and explain. I should just write this in. Let's have this on the page instead of me having to drop all this backstory. And so, you know, I thought it was an awesome first line. Turns out it's not the first line. It'll be the first line of chapter 2, you know?
It's interesting because I think like kind of going back to like, we were talking about how like it used to be like very prevalent to be like, you got to start in the action. Like a lot of people would talk about like wherever it is you think you need to start the book, you actually need to start it like further into the story. But
Not always
like,
true.
no, I've experienced the same thing where it's like I was like trying to drop the character into like this big scene, and like something was about to happen. And yeah, I was like trying to like do all the world building and explain like why they were there, what was going on, and why it was important. And it was like, no, I gotta like back this up some.
That's the issue with like the thing with the character being chased through the forest thing. Like, what happened before that? Because maybe that's more interesting to me to begin reading. Like maybe somebody's stalking her. Maybe there was like a tense standoff at the edge of the forest that would have been way more interesting to like drop us in at that point. And then the chase happens, and therefore I care about the character being chased, So yeah, I remember that advice being really prevalent. Like, cut your first chapter and start immediately in the action. And it's like, well, maybe that's why I got all these terrible chase scenes I had to read. Thanks, guys.
What you just mentioned too, like that you need to know the character better. That's something like that I always consider in first scenes is like in openings is like, how can I like introduce my character and like what they want? Because I think that can be really important in an opening to like, even if like they're not up against like their main conflict yet or anything, just like introducing like this is the character and this is what's important to them, so that you care more when they're running through the forest or whatever.
Exactly.
Wait, my thing leads really nicely from Emma's because I was just flipping through my Kindle app to see like what arcs or whatever I had to just look at some opening lines, and I think we will appreciate this more than most. But it's from Book Lovers by Emily Henry. When books are your life, or in my case, your job, you get a pretty good sense at guessing where the story is going. I want to know what story she is trying to pick apart, and also people whose jobs or books are great.
For sure. And it makes me think too of like the Act Your Age Eve Brown first sentence, which was, not really consequential to the plot to come, but it tells you so much about like, this
Who
is
she
Eve.
is.
She cares a lot about being understood and being particular about the things that she's saying, which is kind of like reading on in contrast to how people perceive her. You're like, oh, Eve doesn't know what she's talking about when she uses these words. And that's like a pet peeve of hers. And it is like right there, right up front. Great book. We did a whole chat on that series. Let's move into the next exercise. We're going to do another 5-minute one. I'm curious to see what people come up with, since this is a photo that seems very in the action. But not necessarily. So we're going to take another 5 minutes, do another first line exercise, and then we'll do a shorter in-between chat, and then one more of these exercises before we move on. All right. Good luck, everyone. In time. We had one that if you were watching, you saw me freak out on screen because I was freaking out. I need you to write this, Vanessa. Vanessa said to become a mermaid, first she had to drown.
Ooh. Spooky.
Yes. Joe Catherine said she looked through the barrier. Her lab partner was an air breather. Misty Kate said she had that dream again where she was swimming in the shark aquarium in her wedding dress while everyone paid admission to watch.
Oh, I like it.
Matthew said, no matter how many times I have died, I always dreaded the feeling of helplessness when being drowned. Andrew said Ellie wanted a normal wedding day, but instead she was trying to sneak into the palace through the drain.
My very contrarian brain tried to make it as far out of the action as I could. No matter what the final paragraph looked like, there was no way the time I'd spent floating awkwardly under the water trying to hold this ridiculous pose could have been worth it.
I did. Listen, I didn't mean to be a stereotype, but the lights went out and something deep in my DNA told me I needed to investigate what was making the scratching sound outside.
Oh, creepy.
I decided to go a retelling route. I did Wendy's nightgown clung to her struggling limbs as Tink held her beneath the surface.
Yes.
Dang it, Tink. I definitely went with the wedding dress thing, like many people. So mine is the woman at the altar isn't me, but I guess you'll never know unless they find me at the bottom of this lake.
Ooh.
I like that.
Yeah, I want to read more.
Oh no, another project.
So I'm gonna move us on a little quicker this time. Oh, we have a couple more. Psych, we're not moving on quicker. We had one from Jennifer. Gods, I hate being Poseidon's daughter, Ocean thought as she hid from her tormentors in the harbor at the prom. Actually, in the water, as if she were a mermaid.
I like it.
And Griswold said, my grandmother first told me about the lady in the lake when I was 6, but it wasn't until I was 16 and saw her for the first time that I knew my grandmother's tales were never stories, but warnings.
Ooh. I like
Yes.
ominous.
Missy Kate said, that is very Bly Manor, Aaron.
Oh, heck
So.
Thank you for that compliment.
And Griswold also said, I second that Vanessa should start drafting that mermaid idea. Yes.
Do it. Do it, do it, do it.
All right. So we've got another first line here. This one's from Gear Breakers by Zoe Hanamakuta. It says, it makes sense that when times were desperate enough, when the people were frenzied enough, at a certain point we went past praying to deities and started to build them instead.
Ooh. That is amazing.
Right. And so I wanted to talk just very briefly about the musicality of language. Obviously, we all have very different voices when we're writing things. And I'm curious if you have any tips for figuring out what rhythm of writing works for you and how to like fine tune that.
That's hard. It's like a little like asking questions about voice. Like, how do you improve your voice? But obviously, like reading a lot. And then, you know, I always do a thing where I will read a book for enjoyment. And then if it's really well done, I'll read it again for stuff like voice and the rhythm of language. See how the author's experimenting with like paragraphs, like how short and how long their sentences are, how they fit together. You know, in their action scenes, are they using like a more staccato voice and narrative, you know, with short, quick sentences, stuff like that. So, yeah.
I think definitely with a first line, figuring out like, and this is varies project to project, like whether you want something like shorter, very like punchy, or you like want something like longer and lyrical. And a lot of that's going to have to do with like the type of impact you want to make, or like the type of image you want to create with that first scene, and like the type of book you're writing.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a big fan of reading poetry as well. I think that can be really helpful, not just because poetry is great, but when you're trying to particularly study how words can sound nice, for lack of a better phrasing, when you're trying to study ways that you can also make your words sound nice, in ways that readers might not even necessarily notice. But it's just all about being so intentional, I feel like.
That makes me realize that I'm definitely like, as a writer, I don't know, I probably pulled in all the time by like first sentences that are very lyrical and beautiful, but like as a writer, I'm definitely pulled towards the short punchy ones that are like on their own line or on their own paragraph even, and then, you know, the really like crazy ones that hook you. And I don't even remember which book this was, but there was one about tarry black footprints on the ceiling. And I remember just being, it was a horror book, but yeah, I can't remember. But
You
it
don't
was just,
say.
yes, very obviously. But I just remember that like jabbed into my brain and was like, I need to know more. And it was just one sentence on its own. And then, of course, the next paragraph we got into what that looked like, why it was a thing. But yeah, the amount of questions that I have at that, right? How impactful that is.
For sure. So we're going to do another exercise, another 5-minute one, and then the next one's going to be a slightly longer one, because we're going to broaden a little to beginnings. So we've got one more picture, 5-minute exercise. See if you can come up with a fun first line for it. Let me share this and get my timer started. We're going to go 5 minutes. Good luck. And time. Jennifer said, "Woohoo! The Golden Gate Bridge. Can we go home now?" Joe Catherine said, "Say cheat." Wait, hold on. What's he doing? And Misty Kate said, "The same photographer was there again, but they were not there to take shots of the sunset or the boats in the harbor."
Mine was the assassin my former employer had hired to kill me was late.
If you're gonna kill me, at least be on time, right?
Honestly.
I had a really hard time with this one. Also, I noticed they're all water based.
I didn't notice that at all. Misty Kate said that too.
Misty Kate mentioned that, yes, and I was like, that is correct. But yeah, I had an enormously difficult time with this one for some reason, and came up with he had followed Patricia Gardner for 6 blocks until she was in view of the vast stretch of the Golden Gate Bridge. I don't know what he did after that. No idea.
I had bridges had always been neutral territory until today.
Ooh, I like that one.
I went not horror this time, and said Georgia had never understood the phrase "so hot you're hurting my feelings" until she saw the woman at the other side of the river walk.
Is that a Taylor Swift lyric or no?
Some TikTok song.
Okay. I feel like it's Taylor Swift, but maybe not.
She does have a song that's like that. She's like, "You make me so gorgeous," or "You're so gorgeous it makes me mad," or something.
Yeah, that's what it is.
We had some more in the comments. Andrew said, "We had always lived in fear of the people across the bridge, but tomorrow I was going to claim a little bit of their power for myself." Matthew said, "Looking back at the setting sun and the distance covered so far, Laura knew it wouldn't be long until the mutagen took hold of her yet again."
Ooh, that's a good one.
And Ed Griswold said, "Can you recall the colors from the last sunset you saw, how red melted into orange?" I can. The photo of that sunset was the last normal day in Greenville.
Nice.
Okay, so now talking more about beginnings just generally. Let me pull off that slide. I'm curious, is there anything that you always try to do in an opening chapter regardless of project?
Opening chapter or opening line?
Opening chapter.
Opening chapter. Definitely. I mean, the obvious things. Yeah. I'm hearing like feedback or something.
Yeah, I'm hearing some background noise too.
I think it is all over in the background.
Oh.
The child is going, ooh.
For the first chapter, I think usually all of the obvious things, like trying to establish the question that's going to hook the people, and a little bit about the character. Hopefully in the first chapter, I would make them either be an interesting character or a likable character. And that's something I usually try to establish. And then I do like an opening chapter leading for action. Like, if not actual action or an inciting incident, we're at least leading up to one pretty quick.
Yeah, I think less about action in the first chapter and more about conflict in the first chapter. Because of course, like some books are not going to have action because it's not that type of book. But I always want there to be some form of conflict that helps like reveal like who the character is and like what they're up against and what they're trying to accomplish and those sorts of things. And I use that to like help develop the character and the world building by having like
sorry, I should say conflict, not action. You are using the right word. Yes.
And also just like, and this can be one of like a harder thing, but also very important, I think, is just like setting the tone for the book in the first chapter. And I think that's another reason that sometimes those like running through the woods type first chapters don't work. It's because it like you'll have like a first chapter that's like super full of action, and then like it turns out the book isn't that action packed, you know. And so you want to make sure you're like setting a tone for the type of book it's going to be.
Yeah,
and
I was
setting
thinking
your
that when we
expectations.
were talking about dislikes in first chapters and that as well. It's like anything with a dream sequence of like,
Oh,
this
yeah.
wasn't real. This is not at all what I can expect from this book. I just feel like I've wasted my time.
Yes.
Very hard to pull off. Yeah.
Yeah.
Or sometimes
Same.
when you read a first chapter, but really it's a prologue. It just was labeled first chapter, and you're like, oh, so I'm not following these characters. Okay.
Yeah, it really, really depends for me personally as a reader. Like I grew up reading high fantasy, and I feel like that happens a lot in high fantasy where you're at chapter 1 and then the characters die at the end and you're like, I'm sorry, what? I really feel strongly that that can only be something that works, at least personally for me, if like something from that is tied in like pretty soon after that with it, even with a different set of characters. Like the reason they died, for example, is like what's propelling the characters in chapter 2.
Yeah, instead of that like aha moment right at the end of the book, you're like, oh, that's why that mattered.
Exactly.
Like actually, because I know some people like really hate prologues. I don't hate prologues, but yeah, I think they need to be tied in, and also if the prologue is going to focus on a different character than your main character, I think it needs to be short. Because a lot of times I can tell if it's like a prologue and it's like very short, that like, okay, this probably isn't our main character. Because actually it's funny that like the first line Megan did was a marvelous light, which the prologue or first chapter or whatever it is not about the main character. It's about a character who dies. But it, like Erin said, it starts the plot. And it's kind of like why everything get kicked into motion is because this character dies.
Yeah. And I keep thinking about George R.R. Martin's books as like exceptions to a lot of these rules, because eventually and I haven't even read these. I just think it's cool that he's doing the first chapter and all of them, the character dies. So you're kind of thrown into action, whatever, and right from the beginning of like, this character isn't going to matter. This character will be dead by the end of this chapter. And that makes it interesting to me of like,
I feel like that
some
is
other piece.
That's a very
it tells you
classic
there's
high
something else
fantasy.
that's important in here.
Yeah. It's a pretty classic high fantasy thing to start with like a totally different character and kill them off. And like I always think of it as a way of like, in the opening scene of a movie sometimes, like I watch a lot of horror movies. So you get that scene where it's like, it's the two girls in Scream. They're not the main characters. They're just there to die and show you who's doing the killing. And then we get into the story. I mean, that's obviously a more narrow focused thing, but like if you had a more, bigger high fantasy, it could be the scene where you're seeing the darkness crawl over the land from the point of view of, Joe Bob, who's going to die from darkness related injuries within the first 10 minutes, and then you get the cast of characters actually fighting said darkness, right? It's an opening scene. It's a broader picture showing you what's going on before
I think
you
for
zone
me,
in.
In Game of Thrones, it only works because it's so broad, and however many books are now,
Yeah.
that like 6 characters have died, and they're all just like, the further you get into the story, these just random little snippets you get where like, oh, it's this person, and I guess they're toast. It's kind of fun.
I think with slasher novels and films, it's like staple of the genre, and particularly with novels, it can tell you so much about whether you're going to enjoy the book, with like the way they set up how creepy the first kill
Am
is.
I going to enjoy watching these murders?
Exactly. I think it was Stephanie Perkins's There's Someone Inside Your House. It opens and the killer has an egg timer that the person keeps like finding in random places around the house, and then the egg timer goes off right when at the end of the chapter and the person is killed. And I thought that was just like such a clever start and so cool, and like to me how clever the opening chapter is what's more important in a horror or a slasher novel than getting attached to the character. So yeah,
I think
lots of tropes of your genre.
Yeah, I think in fantasy, like a prologue or a first chapter that it focuses on a different character, I think it works best if your actual main characters have to deal with whatever was in the prologue, like early on in the book.
Yeah,
Because I think a lot of times issues with it comes down to like something happens in the prologue, and then like we kind of mentioned, like it doesn't connect to the main story until like the end, or like you don't figure out how it
Which is the
connects until
issue,
later
yeah.
on.
The
When you have
Twilight
something
prologue.
happen. Yeah, because like
Yeah.
I think the beginning of the first Game of Thrones book is like the Watchers of the Wall or whatever, like seeing the White Walkers or whatever. And the guy running away, and then like very quickly the Starks have to deal with like disciplining him for running away and stuff. So like it becomes relevant very quickly instead of it just being like, oh, I totally forgot about that prologue. Now like 3/4 of the way into the book you're bringing it up again.
I think it's a case of like everything should be at least somewhat connected in a way that the reader can pick up on.
Yeah, because I feel
fairly
like reading
quickly.
epic fantasy when we were younger and the scope of publishing wasn't as broad, I could put up with being more confused because I kind of had to be. There was less choices. But now I'm like, if I'm a few chapters in and I have no idea what's happening, I'm like, I cannot get invested in this.
Yeah, definitely.
I'm also curious. I'm going to skip the 4th exercise and we're going to jump right to the 5th since it's over an hour. So before we move into that, I'm curious, how much of your beginning do you know before you start writing it? Are you fully pantsing your first drafts, or do you know kind of exactly how you want to start it?
Say most of the time I know exactly like where I want to start. I've only had one book where like I could not figure out like where to have it start, and I'm still not sure. It's been like 4 years since I started that book and I still don't know where it should start.
I'm often like, I'm someone who does plot a lot. So this is kind of a unusual answer for me, but I don't actually usually know my first line or my first scene. Because I start sort of from the inciting incident usually, is where I start planning. Bless you. So I actually have to quite often sit down and try to figure it out. And so I do often have false starts and have to go back and put in, if I'm finding myself having to try to drop backstory, and like I said before, I have to go in and start things earlier.
Yeah, I usually have like just like a sentence, maybe two, of like what's going to happen in each scene that I have planned out. And I have a really bad visual brain, so I need details in order to write
Me
what
too.
the reader should see. So I've started doing this thing where I do like this like brainstorm beforehand, where I'm like 5 things the character can see and 4 things they can touch or whatever, to help like ground me in the scene, because otherwise I'm like,
Cool.
I can just write dialogue. That's what I've got.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. I do feel like it's different for each project, but I typically know at least the framework of the whole first act before I start, and then I just leave that little crisis for the middle, when I get there and it's like, oh no, this isn't a book. I do really enjoy beginnings though. I think they are quite fun to write.
I think they're probably my favorite. I go into
Yeah.
it with a varying level of how much I know about it, but I definitely know more about the beginning than I do the end. So that always comes easier.
And it does for me. It always bodes well if a project has steeped enough for me that I have a good idea for a first line. Like even if it's not the first line that I ultimately keep, if I have something that in my head going in, I'm like, oh yeah, that's the character's voice. I take that as a good sign. So we are going to move into our last exercise for the night. This is going to be your chance to work or rework the opening lines of your own work in progress. We're going to take 10 minutes to do this one. I guess if you want to see the pictures for what was going to be the last one, I'll give you those too, actually, just in case you're like, I don't have anything I'm working on or that needs work for the beginning. So this was going to be, we're going to look at vibes. So if you want to steal any vibes from this before we move in, any of those photos, again, all the photos for this evening were from unsplash.com. And yeah, so we're going to try it on our own work, go for 10 minutes, keeping in mind the big 4: character, conflict, world, and tone. work or rework the opening chunk of your current work in progress. And we will check in 10 minutes, which will be at the 50. Good luck. And time. So we are going to be wrapping up soon. That was our last exercise of the evening. We had a comment from N. Griswold. Are there resources you use to prep for the workshop that you can share with us? I want to read a bit more into character conflict, world, and tone. I do have some. I don't have them like nicely put together right now, but I'll get them nicely put together, and I'll have that link for y'all next week. I wrote it down on a Post-it note. Did anyone have any last minute feelings on writing beginnings, first lines? Any stunning realizations about first lines? I've got another first line here from a romance that I love. Spoiler alert, by Olivia Dade. And it is, between takes, Marcus did his best not to acknowledge the obvious. This was a stupid ass way to die. Not how you would expect a rom-com to open, but I was all in right from the opening line. Thank you so much to everyone for joining us. It was so great to have you here. I had a lot of fun doing these different exercises and really appreciate you sharing your first lines that you came up with. Next week, we are going to be talking about a movie called The Willoughbys for our movie night. We're doing a fun movie night book club mashup since we've been talking not just about storytelling in novel form, and we're trying to expand it. This quarter, we're going to be watching The Willoughbys, and then next month, I believe it is, when it's book club night, we're going to be talking about the book and the script. So like some people will have read the novel, some people will have read the script. And it's going to be a lot of fun. So hopefully you'll join us. We will be talking about the movie. It is on Netflix, I believe. And it's going to be a lot of fun. Hopefully you'll all be there. And we've got some really fun stuff planned for the next few weeks that I'm very excited about. And yeah, be sure to like and subscribe if you like us and want to be subscribed to our content. We are here every Sunday at 7:30 Eastern time. Thanks for being here. We'll see you all later. Bye.
Bye.